I never expected that the blind date my mom arranged would be the beginning of a series of crazy events. She dragged me out of bed early in the morning, shoved a cream-white dress into my hands, and said, "Put this on, it's proper. Elegant. Something that makes your skin look softer, like a lady's. You need to look decent when you meet him." The guy's family was apparently loaded. Rumor had it that his grandfather was seriously ill and refused treatment until his grandson got married. Who knows, maybe I'd catch his eye and instantly climb the social ladder. I just sighed. A blind date? In this day and age? Forced marriage still existed? But seeing the eager look in my mom's eyes, I couldn't bring myself to say no. And so I ended up here, at the most expensive French restaurant in New York, sitting across from a man I never imagined I'd meet in a place like this. Ethan Langston, CEO of Langston Corporation. My direct boss. I froze. So did he, just for a few seconds. But then he quickly returned to his usual calm and composed self. Ethan Langston coolly pulled out his chair and sat down, folding his arms, his deep, unreadable eyes staring at me like I was a financial report. "It's you," he said, his voice low and rich, sending goosebumps racing down my arms. I swallowed hard, lowered my head, and softly replied, "Hello, Mr. Langston." He frowned, his eyes scanning my face once more before shifting to his usual indifferent expression. Clearly, he didn't recognize me. In his eyes, I was probably just another invisible employee from the planning department. I opened my mouth to introduce myself, but he cut me off. "Your name?" "Hannah. Hannah Nguyen." He gave a small nod, opened the menu, and said nothing more. The silence was deafening, I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. I felt completely out of place. This wasn't a blind date, it felt more like an interview for a contractual wife. Suddenly, he spoke again, voice emotionless, "I don't like beating around the bush. My grandfather is seriously ill and refuses treatment unless I get married. I need a wife. On paper." "Married, on paper?" I blinked in disbelief. "Yes," he leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on me. "I choose you, because you seem easy to manage." I nearly spat out my water. God, this was my boss? Not just overbearing but also brutally direct, leaving no room for retreat. I let out an awkward laugh. "Mr. Langston, I think you're mistaken. I work at your company. This whole situation—" "I don't care what you do," he interrupted. "All I need is for you to sign the marriage contract. $150,000. That was the price." I stared at the man in front of me, cold, arrogant, domineering, like the perfect male lead from all those romantic dramas I used to obsess over. But this time, I wasn't a viewer. I was the main character in this insane story. He didn't know I worked for him, and I didn't dare admit it. Because if I said no, my mom would lose her mind. But if I said yes, I'd be stepping into a fake relationship with a guaranteed unhappy ending. I bit my lip, and finally nodded. "All right. I agree. But I have 3 conditions." I looked directly into Ethan Langston's icy eyes. At this moment, I realized I was entering the biggest gamble of my life, one I never asked to play, but couldn't escape from either. First, I spoke, my voice low but steady, "This marriage must stay secret. During the 3 months we're married, no one can know. Not even your employees." He frowned, like he was assessing just how bold I really was. "Second," I continued, "we don't live together. You have your life. I have mine. Unless there's an event we have to attend together, I want no entanglements, no personal involvement." I saw the corner of his mouth twitch slightly. "You're giving me the 30 rule?" he asked. "No love, no strings, no mess?" I lifted my chin. I'm a woman who likes things clear. If it's a fake marriage, it should be crystal clear. He paused for a few seconds, then said, "And the third?" I took a deep breath. This was the most important one. "You can't investigate me." For a brief second, Ethan Langston's gaze sharpened. "What are you hiding from me?" he asked. I gave a faint smile, though my heart was pounding in fear. "Nothing. I just don't want anyone digging into my personal life. If we're two strangers marrying for mutual benefit, then let's keep it strictly that, strangers with boundaries." The silence was thick, so tense it felt like the air was freezing. Finally, he tossed his napkin onto the table and crossed his arms. "Fine. I accept." I exhaled in relief. But before I could feel good about it, he added, "You'll come with me to see my grandfather this weekend. And you better act convincingly. He's sharp, he won't tolerate even a hint of fakeness." "All right," I nodded. "We'll sign the contract tomorrow afternoon. I'll have my assistant send over the paperwork." "Understood," I said as we both stood up. That bizarre conversation had lasted barely 30 minutes. But to me, it felt like a lifetime. I stepped out of the restaurant, my heart tangled like a ball of yarn. What I didn't know was, at the very moment I walked through that door, a black car parked nearby had secretly recorded the entire meeting. Inside the vehicle sat a woman with porcelain skin and piercing eyes, her lips curled into a cold smile. "Ethan Langston, now things are finally getting interesting." She was Tiffany Blake, the heiress of the Blake Corporation, and the woman who had always considered herself Ethan's unofficial fiancée. And she would never allow some nobody like Hannah Nguyen to infiltrate her world. I returned to my tiny rented apartment, head still spinning. Pretending to smile at the CEO? It sounded like a joke, yet I was living it. That night, I stood in front of my mirror, rehearsing demure smiles and graceful bows. If I was going to play the role of the Langston family's daughter-in-law, I had to play it well. On Saturday afternoon, right on schedule, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of my shabby apartment complex. I stepped outside just as the chauffeur exited and opened the door for me. Inside sat Ethan Langston, legs crossed, dressed sharply in a black suit. His gaze swept over me with detached indifference. I wore a soft blue maxi dress, my hair tied in a neat bun, makeup subtle and elegant. Doing my best to resemble the upper-class bride they were expecting. He didn't say a word. Just gave a curt nod. The car carried us to the Langston family estate in the suburbs. As the iron gates opened, I was stunned. A 3-story European-style mansion stood before us, surrounded by a pristine garden and carefully manicured hedges. Housekeepers bowed as we drove in. This world felt nothing like my cramped daily life. As soon as we stepped into the grand foyer, I saw him. Ethan's grandfather, Leonard Langston, was already waiting. Despite his silver hair, his eyes were sharp and alert. Beside him sat a middle-aged woman, probably Ethan's mother. "Grandfather, this is Hannah," Ethan said, his tone flat, as if introducing a product rather than a girlfriend. I stepped forward, bowed politely. "Nice to meet you, sir." Mr. Langston squinted at me for a long moment before suddenly asking, "What do you do for a living?" I froze. A simple question, yet a dangerous trap. I couldn't tell him I was an employee at his company, but whatever I said had to be flawless. I smiled calmly. "I studied media design, sir. Currently, I work as a freelance creative consultant." Ethan shot me a quick glance. Probably surprised I could answer so smoothly. "Design, the old man nodded slowly. "Can you sketch by hand?" I tensed. He had unknowingly hit my weakest spot. I forced a smile, but inside, I was panicking. What kind of designer can't even sketch? But I worked in the planning department, constantly writing proposals. I barely knew how to draw, let alone sketch by hand. I was just about to dodge the question when Ethan Langston stepped in. "She's very skilled at digital illustration, Grandpa. Traditional sketching isn't her main focus." The old man furrowed his brows but didn't press further. I quietly sighed in relief. That was a close one. Dinner unfolded in a tense atmosphere. I tried to maintain the perfect image, spoke moderately, smiled politely, and kept myself from chiming in too much. But Mr. Langston's eyes kept drifting toward me, as if he sensed something wasn't quite right. Toward the end of the meal, he suddenly pushed himself up with his cane and walked straight toward me. He looked me dead in the eyes and asked slowly, "Are you truly willing to commit to my grandson?" I was caught off guard. I. Right then, Ethan stood up and gently held my hand. "She doesn't need to answer," he said calmly. "I chose her. You promised you'd get treatment if I agreed to marry." Silence. Mr. Langston's eyes dropped to our hands, intertwined tightly, before he turned away with deliberate slowness. "I hope you both aren't treating marriage like a game." A shiver ran down my spine. For the first time in my life, I realized that marriage wasn't about flowers, rings, or dresses. It was about responsibility. Even a fake one carried weight. On the way back, Ethan didn't say a word. I sat beside him, my hand still faintly warm from his grip earlier. Even though it was just for show, my heart had skipped a beat. Monday morning, I took a day off to finalize the contract. A wedding with no dress. No flowers. No congratulations. Just signatures and binding clauses. That afternoon, I arrived at a discreet cafe downtown, exactly as Ethan had instructed. Inside, someone was already waiting for me. Tristan Young, his most trusted assistant. He glanced up, scanning me briefly. His gaze wasn't hostile, but it was certainly evaluative. "Miss Hannah," he said, "this is the temporary agreement. Mr. Langston asked that you read it thoroughly before signing." I nodded and sat down. A thick stack, nearly 10 pages, each clause printed clearly. 1. Marriage duration, 3 months. 2. No interference in each other's private life. 3. Must attend family events upon request. 4. Strict confidentiality required. 5. After 3 months, the divorce papers must be signed immediately. No refusal allowed. At the bottom, compensation, $150,000. I gripped the pen tightly. The words blurred a little in front of me. How did I end up here? Getting married, for money. But I had no other choice. I signed. Tristan glanced over to verify. Then suddenly paused. "Wait," he said, freezing slightly as I handed back the pen. Something was off. He frowned, eyes fixed on my signature. "Your name?" "Hannah Nguyen?" "Hannah Nguyen from the planning department at Langston Corporation." My heart pounded. Damn it. He recognized me. I tried to stay calm. "I used to work at Langston Corporation. But I'm currently on a personal leave." Ethan Langston had never asked about my past position. Tristan Young went quiet for a few seconds, then calmly collected the contract papers without asking further. But I knew he had taken note. That afternoon, I moved into the luxury apartment Ethan had arranged for our marriage, at least on paper. He, of course, remained at the Langston family estate. We stayed true to the agreement, no cohabitation. Just as I finished unpacking, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Who do you think you are, climbing into Ethan Langston's bed?" I froze. A minute later, another message came through, a photo of me, taken while I was stepping out of my building, answering a call from HR. Even though I had officially requested a week off, the assistant's voice on the phone was urgent. "Hannah, the department head asked for you to attend tonight's product launch event. Everyone from the planning department is required." I was stunned. I had originally drafted the plan for that event, but now, I wasn't just a regular employee anymore. Showing up would be risky. I was about to decline when another message came through. "Dress nicely tonight. I'm looking forward to meeting you. Miss Nobody. Tiffany Blake." Attached was another photo, me dragging a suitcase, exhausted, walking into the new apartment Ethan had prepared. She's watching me. My hand clenched around the phone. A chill ran through my entire body. If I didn't show up, she'd leak the photos. If I did, I'd have to face the man I was lying to. That evening, I wore the simplest business dress I had, added light makeup, and tried to blend into the crowd at Langston Corp's lavish event hall. The stage lights were blazing. The coordinators called out staff groups for setup. I slipped behind the curtains, praying everything would go by quickly. But just as I was reviewing the presentation slides, a sharp female voice cut through the air behind me. "Well, isn't it Miss Hannah? The future Mrs. Langston still clocking in like a regular wage slave?" I turned around. Tiffany Blake, in a blazing red dress, eyeliner sharp as a blade, lips curled in a mocking smile. Beside her stood several other heiresses, poorly hiding their smirks. I clenched my fists. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." She chuckled coldly. "TCH. You're clever, aren't you? Hiding your true self so well." But unfortunately, Ethan Langston had never been someone easy to fool. At that moment, the sound of polished leather shoes echoed behind me. I didn't dare turn around. My heart was about to burst from my chest. "Who are you talking about?" That deep, familiar voice, Ethan Langston. The air froze. I slowly turned. Our eyes met. In that moment, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. His gaze traveled from my professional dress to the name badge pinned to my chest. My chest tightened. "You work for my company," he said, voice dropping. I couldn't say anything. All I could do was nod. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked away. And I was left standing there like a statue, under Tiffany Blake's mocking stare. After the event, I was summoned to a private meeting room. Not to be scolded, but to face the man I had kept secrets from. He stood with his back to the window, not looking at me. Then came his cold, quiet voice. "Why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" I bit my lip and whispered. "I was afraid you'd cancel the agreement." He turned around, his eyes like ice. "You think I hate my employees that much?" I said nothing. Ethan stepped forward, stopping right in front of me. When he spoke again, his words felt like knives in my chest. 3 months. I said 3 months. But now, I feel like an idiot. I looked up. "Are you calling off the engagement?" He didn't answer. But his eyes said everything. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of losing something that was never really mine to begin with. Since that night, Ethan Langston hadn't called. Hadn't texted. No messages asking me to visit the estate. No reminders to meet his grandfather. Not even a simple "Are you okay?" I knew I had broken the one rule he cared about most, complete honesty. The irony was bitter. I was only his wife on paper, yet Tiffany Blake was the one standing proudly beside him at every high society event. Every time news of their picture-perfect match trended online, my chest tightened. Even though I had no right to feel jealous. I came into the office every day like a ghost. When I saw Tristan Young in the elevator, he merely gave me a curt nod. As if I were a failed project everyone wanted to forget. Everything was falling apart. Until that day. That rainy afternoon. I left my desk to help check equipment for the upcoming tech seminar. But then, a heavy downpour hit. I was about to look for shelter when I spotted a familiar black car idling at the curb across the street. Ethan's car. He hadn't gone home yet, he was personally inspecting the event venue. I hesitated for a moment, then turned toward the storage building. As I stepped inside, the lights suddenly went out. "Damn," I muttered under my breath. Outside, the rain poured down like buckets. I turned on my phone flashlight. I was just about to check the breaker panel when I heard a loud metallic crash at the far end of the warehouse. Reflexively, I walked toward the sound. And then I saw him, Ethan Langston, lying unconscious beside a collapsed shelving unit. I panicked and rushed over. "Ethan! Ethan, can you hear me?" His arm was bleeding, and his head had struck the edge of a table, blood staining the floor a dark red. Without thinking, I took off my coat and tied it tightly around his arm to slow the bleeding. Then I called 911. While waiting for the ambulance, I kept calling his name. Don't fall asleep. Ethan, wake up, can you hear me? My voice trembled. I had never felt so terrified in my life. He could ignore me, he could resent me. But he couldn't just lie there like that. When the ambulance finally arrived, I rode with him to the hospital. Tristan Young, his assistant, showed up minutes later, clearly shaken when he saw me by Ethan's side. You found him? I nodded, my voice hoarse. If I hadn't gone to the warehouse. Tristan didn't finish his sentence, just lowered his head deeply. That night, I sat outside the ER for 3 hours. When the doctor finally emerged and said he was okay, just soft tissue injuries and mild blood loss, I finally exhaled. A little while later, the door to the recovery room opened. A nurse allowed me in to help redress the wound on his arm. I sat quietly beside him, watching his face as he slept, brow furrowed. As I leaned over to change the bandages, a hoarse voice broke the silence. It's you. I froze, my hand stopping mid-motion. Why, are you here? He asked. I folded the gauze, my voice barely steady. Because I'm still your wife. Even if it's only on paper. He didn't respond. I was about to stand when he suddenly grabbed my wrist, lightly. Don't go. Just those 2 words. And my heart cracked. In that terrifying moment, I knew. He didn't need a contract. He didn't need conditions. He just needed someone to be there. And I was. After that night, Ethan Langston changed. He still wasn't talkative. He didn't offer apologies or affection. He didn't show much emotion. But I could see the subtle shifts in his actions. Small things, but unmistakable. One morning, when I arrived at the office, a familiar latte was already waiting on my desk. The exact flavor I liked, strong, barely sweet. I glanced toward the CEO's office. The glass door slid open, and I caught a glimpse of him walking past, still with that same cold, aloof presence. But in his hand was an Americano, the exact same drink I had bought him the first time, back when I was just one of his subordinates. We didn't speak much these days, but somehow, we had started to understand each other in silence. That evening, he sent me a text. Come with me to the Langston estate tomorrow. My grandfather has something to announce. I couldn't guess what it was, only that my heart felt uneasy. The next day, I wore a modest cream-colored dress and arrived at the Langston mansion. As soon as I entered the grand living room, Mr. Langston was already seated, leaning on his cane, his expression more serious than usual. You two have been married for over a month now, he said in a low, firm voice, looking at both of us. I don't have much time left. Before I begin treatment again, I want to witness your wedding ceremony. I froze in place. A real wedding. Even Ethan, sitting beside me, paused for a moment. But he didn't object. He simply nodded. Okay. We'll do it. I turned to him, eyes wide. But he wouldn't meet my gaze. That one sentence slammed like a nail into the invisible contract between us. After the meeting, I pulled him outside into the garden. Are you crazy? I hissed. A real wedding? We signed a contract, Ethan. Did you forget? He looked at me, his eyes unreadable. We can't fool my grandfather with just a piece of paper, he replied. I stood there, stunned. He was pulling me in deeper. What do you want from me? I asked silently. There was a moment of stillness. Then he answered, quietly, slowly. I don't want to lose you. It felt like lightning striking my chest. I didn't dare ask if that meant he liked me. Because I was terrified that if the answer was no, I wouldn't have the strength to keep going. Amid all these fake days and scripted emotions, the only thing real was the way my heart thudded wildly whenever he was near. But that happiness didn't last long. Another message came in, again from that too familiar anonymous number. A wedding? You think you've won? I'll make sure you lose everything. Even him. Attached was a photo of me leaving the luxury apartment, carrying documents, my hands stained with ink. Tiffany Blake was digging into my past again. Only now, she wasn't playing subtle anymore. She was preparing for a full-on attack. I thought things couldn't get worse, until Monday morning came. A surprise family meeting. A message from Ethan landed at 6 a.m. Come to the estate. It's urgent. Before I could even fully process it, I was swept into the fiercest storm yet. The entire Langston family had gathered, uncles, aunts, distant relatives, even shadow shareholders from within the company. And Mr. Langston himself, fresh out of his first round of chemotherapy, refused to rest. The air was heavy, like we were walking into a courtroom ready for a public execution. At the center of the room, Tiffany Blake sat with her legs crossed, draped in a striking red dress, holding a thick folder. Her eyes gleamed with triumph. She placed the folder on the coffee table. With your permission, Grandpa, I have something to say, for Ethan's sake. I can't stay silent anymore. She turned on the projector. Up came images. Me, stepping out of the luxury apartment Ethan had arranged. Me, signing a document. An excerpt from the company's HR database. Hannah and Gwen, planning department. Average income. No personal assets. This is the future wife of Langston Corp's CEO? A distant aunt sneered. She's just a gold digger, another relative chimed in. Ethan, you've been deceived. She clearly had an agenda. Each word was like a blade slicing into my skin. I stood in the center of the lavish room, drowning in condescending stares from every direction. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened like a noose. Only one person remained silent. Ethan Langston. He stood up, calmly surveying the room, then walked over to his grandfather. I've already said it, she is my wife. I chose her. But she lied to you, and Uncle snapped, slamming the table. Ethan met his gaze evenly. I also hid from you the fact that she worked for my company. That's on me. No one else has the right to interfere. Mr. Langston sat quietly, processing everything. Then Tiffany suddenly stood. I object, she exclaimed. Ethan and I have been betrothed since we were kids. Grandpa, you promised me to him. She pointed at me, seething. And she? She's just a nameless employee. The room went still. I stepped forward, voice trembling, but firm. If Grandpa doesn't approve, I will walk away. Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan spun around to face me. What did you just say? I lifted my head, looking directly at him. I don't want to be the reason you lose your family, or your place in the company. This ends here. Then, I turned and walked out of the Langston mansion. Without looking back. I had never felt my heart ache like that. But I knew, letting go was the only way to keep the last shred of my self-respect. He didn't call out. He didn't follow me. All I knew was that by the time I passed through the front gates, the tears had already started falling, and they didn't stop. 3 days passed since I left the Langston estate. My phone was disturbingly silent. No messages. No calls from him. I moved out of the apartment he had rented for us and returned to my old studio. Peeling walls, drafty windows, and loneliness I hadn't felt in weeks. Each night, I curled up in bed, asking myself. It was just a contract. So why does it hurt so much? On the 4th day, I received a phone call. From Mr. Langston. Can you come see me for a moment, Hannah? It was Mr. Langston's voice. I hesitated. There was no anger in his tone, just something softer, understanding. When I arrived at the estate, he was sitting alone on a bench in the garden, holding a stack of papers in his hand. You know, he began, everything Tiffany Blake showed the other day was fake. I froze. We had it investigated. She hired people to fabricate photos, forge documents, and splice information about you, to slander you. I didn't know what to say. He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. I used to think you were just an ordinary girl. But the truth is, you were once a top student at the New York School of Economics. You participated in collaborative projects with the Global Research Institute. You even turned down an international scholarship because your mother was ill. I stood speechless. These were things I had never told anyone. You don't have to hide everything just to live quietly, he said gently. You have the qualifications, the integrity, and the dignity. You are worthy of being a daughter-in-law of the Langston family. My hands tightened into fists. Then why hasn't he come for me? The old man smiled faintly, like he had been waiting for that question. Because he doesn't know where you are. But, if you step out that gate right now. I didn't let him finish. I turned and ran, toward the front gate. And just like he said, he was there. Ethan Langston. Standing in the pouring rain, his white dress shirt soaked through, his hair drenched, eyes dark and sunken. When he saw me, he walked toward me silently, then wrapped his trembling arms around me. I pounded his chest, voice breaking. Why didn't you call me? He whispered, because I was afraid you wouldn't pick up. Why didn't you come for me sooner? He held me tighter. Because I didn't know if I still had the right to ask you to stay. I cried in his arms. He leaned down and whispered against my hair. I'm sorry for making you walk away alone. I'm sorry for letting your heart break. If I can, from now on, I don't want to call you my contract wife anymore. I want to call you my woman. My real, forever Mrs. Langston. The rain kept falling. But I no longer felt cold. Because in the middle of life's storms, I had finally found arms that were no longer pretending. I never thought I'd wear a wedding dress. But today, in front of the mirror, I saw myself. In delicate white tulle, a pure and elegant gown that hugged me perfectly. And a smile I couldn't hold back. Ethan Langston had kept his promise. After all the pain, all the arguments, the contracts, and tears. He was still here. Standing in front of me, reaching out his hand, and saying, let's go home, together. This time, it was real. The wedding was held at a private Langston Resorts retreat, intimate, elegant, with only close family, trusted friends, and a few major media outlets in attendance. I walked down the aisle lined with white flowers, my heart pounding just like it had the first time I met him. And there he stood. Ethan Langston, in a crisp black tuxedo, his eyes never leaving mine for even a second. But this time, those eyes weren't cold. They weren't distant. They were warm, tender. The kind of gaze that told me I was no longer alone. The ceremony was flawless. Until just as the officiant declared, you may now kiss the bride, a sharp voice cut through the hall. Wait. Everyone turned. Tiffany Blake had arrived, wearing a fiery red dress, her eyes as sharp as blades. She raised a manila envelope, her voice ice cold. I have proof that Ethan Langston signed a marriage contract with Hannah Gwynn. This marriage is fraudulent. It's a PR stunt. It's... Slap. A resounding slap echoed across the venue. It wasn't me. And it wasn't anyone from the Langston family's PR team. It was Mrs. Langston, Ethan's mother, who had remained silent until now. She stared Tiffany down. You thought only you knew the truth, she said calmly. I've known since the beginning. And I also know exactly who my real daughter-in-law is. Tiffany stumbled back, her eyes welling with tears. But I was the one Grandpa promised to him. Mr. Langston banged his cane on the ground. You think I didn't know you faked evidence? Paid people to fabricate lies? Don't disgrace our name any further. Shaking, Tiffany turned and walked out of the wedding, defeated. I turned to Ethan, whispering, I thought we'd never get to finish this wedding. He smiled, leaned down, and kissed my forehead. As long as it's you standing next to me, It doesn't matter whether it's perfect or not. In that moment, thunderous applause broke out, crashing like rain. I looked at him, this man who had once hurt me, once been cold and unreachable. And now he held my hand, surrounded by family, beneath soft lights, in a moment filled with real love. We were no longer husband and wife by contract. We were husband and wife by choice. A new beginning. A real life. Together.